Part 2, The Spark of Rebellion. The birth of the Eclipse Resistance. The raid on the Dominion supply depot had been a turning point. Jace Ryder's small band of survivors had struck a blow against the seemingly invincible Dominion, and word of their victory spread like wildfire. Survivors from across the ruined cities of Earth began to flock to Jace's cause, drawn by the hope he represented. Among them were soldiers, engineers, doctors, and ordinary civilians, all united by a single goal: to fight back. Jace knew that if they were to stand a chance against the Dominion, they needed more than just courage. They needed a plan, resources, and a name that would inspire fear in their enemies. And so, the Eclipse Resistance was born. The name was Lyra Tovin's idea. "The Dominion believes they are the light that rules the galaxy," she said. "We will be the shadow that eclipses them." The defector's wisdom. Commander Lyra Tovin quickly became the backbone of the resistance. Her knowledge of Dominion tactics, technology, and weaknesses was invaluable. She had served under General Kale Vorik himself, and her defection had come at great personal cost. Lyra had seen the Dominion's cruelty firsthand, the enslavement of entire species, the destruction of worlds, and the cold efficiency with which they crushed dissent. "The Dominion doesn't just conquer," Lyra explained during one of their strategy meetings. "They break you. They take everything you are and turn it into a weapon against you. But they have one weakness: they underestimate their enemies. They see us as insects, not threats. That's how we'll beat them." A daring plan. With Lyra's guidance, the Eclipse Resistance began to grow. They established hidden bases in the ruins of Earth cities, using the Dominion's own technology against them. Jace's engineering skills proved crucial as he repurposed Dominion drones and weapons for their cause. But resources were scarce. The Dominion controlled most of the planet's infrastructure, and their patrols were everywhere. To survive, the resistance needed supplies: food, medicine, weapons, and fuel. Lyra proposed a daring plan: a raid on a Dominion convoy transporting critical supplies to one of their forward bases. "It's risky," Jace admitted, studying the holographic map of the convoy's route. "But if we pull it off, it could give us everything we need to keep fighting." The ambush. The convoy was heavily guarded, with hover tanks, drones, and elite Dominion soldiers. But Jace and Lyra had a plan. They would strike at a narrow mountain pass, where the convoy would be forced to slow down. Using stolen Dominion explosives, they would trigger a rockslide to block the convoy's path, then attack from above. The night of the raid was tense. Jace and a small team of resistance fighters positioned themselves on the cliffs overlooking the pass, while Lyra led another team to plant the explosives. As the convoy entered the pass, Jace gave the signal. The explosion was deafening. Tons of rock and debris cascaded down the mountainside, blocking the convoy's path. Chaos erupted as the Dominion soldiers scrambled to respond. Jace and his team opened fire from above, picking off the soldiers with precision. But the Dominion wasn't going down without a fight. The battle in the pass. The Dominion's hover tanks turned their cannons toward the cliffs, unleashing a barrage of plasma fire. Jace and his team were forced to take cover as the cliffs around them were reduced to rubble. Below, Lyra's team engaged the Dominion soldiers in close-quarters combat. Jace knew they couldn't hold out for long. "We need to take out those tanks," he shouted over the comms. Using a stolen Dominion rocket launcher, Jace took aim at the nearest hover tank. The rocket streaked through the air, striking the tank's weak spot and sending it up in flames. The resistance fighters cheered, but their victory was short-lived. A Dominion dropship appeared on the horizon, deploying reinforcements. The turning point. Jace's heart sank as he saw the dropship. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But then, something unexpected happened. A group of resistance fighters, led by a grizzled veteran named Garrick Voss, emerged from the shadows. Garrick had been a soldier before the invasion, and his tactical expertise turned the tide of the battle. Using guerrilla tactics, Garrick's team ambushed the Dominion reinforcements, taking them by surprise. With the Dominion forces distracted, Jace and Lyra seized the opportunity. They stormed the convoy, securing the supplies they needed and disabling the remaining hover tanks. By the time the dropship retreated, the Resistance stood victorious. A new alliance. The raid was a success, but it came at a cost. Several Resistance fighters had been killed, and many more were injured. As Jace surveyed the battlefield, he felt the weight of their sacrifice. Garrick approached him, his face grim but determined. "You've got guts, kid," he said. "But guts alone won't win this war. You need soldiers who know how to fight." Jace nodded. "We need everyone we can get. Will you join us?" Garrick extended his hand. "I've been waiting for someone to lead the fight. Count me in." The spark ignites. The raid on the convoy was more than just a victory, it was a spark that ignited the flames of rebellion. News of the Resistance's success spread across the planet, inspiring others to rise up against the Dominion. But Jace knew that their fight was far from over. The Dominion would not take this defeat lightly. They would retaliate with everything they had. As the Eclipse Resistance prepared for the battles to come, Jace felt a glimmer of hope. They were no longer just survivors, they were warriors. And for the first time since the invasion, humanity had a chance. The spark of rebellion had been lit, and it would not be extinguished. Part 1: The Fall of the Titans. The Galactic Dominion's Rise. The Galactic Dominion was a name that struck fear into the hearts of countless species across the galaxy. Led by General Kale Vorak, a towering figure with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, the Dominion had conquered hundreds of worlds. Their armies, known as the Iron Fangs, were unmatched in strength and discipline. Planets fell like dominoes, their defenses crumbling under the Dominion's relentless assault. Earth was no exception. The invasion of Earth was swift and brutal. Cities were reduced to rubble, and humanity's greatest achievements were obliterated in a matter of days. The Dominion's message was clear: resistance was futile. Those who surrendered were enslaved, those who fought were annihilated. The last stand. Amid the chaos, a lone figure emerged from the ashes. Jace Ryder, a former engineer turned guerrilla fighter, had survived the initial onslaught. Unlike the soldiers and leaders who had fallen, Jace was no warrior. He was an ordinary man with an extraordinary will to survive. Jace's first encounter with the Dominion's forces was accidental. He had been scavenging for supplies in the ruins of New York when a Dominion patrol spotted him. Outnumbered and outgunned, Jace did the unthinkable: he fought back. Using his knowledge of the city's infrastructure, Jace set traps and ambushes, turning the Dominion's advanced technology against them. He used EMP grenades to disable their drones, lured their troops into collapsing buildings, and even hijacked a Dominion hover tank. By the time the dust settled, Jace stood victorious, surrounded by the wreckage of his enemies. A glimmer of hope. News of Jace's victory spread like wildfire among the survivors. For the first time since the invasion, humanity had hope. Jace became a symbol of resistance, a beacon of defiance against the Dominion's tyranny. But Jace knew that one victory was not enough. The Dominion would not rest until Earth was completely under their control. If humanity was to survive, they would need to fight back on a larger scale. The gathering storm. Jace began to rally survivors, forming a small but determined resistance group. Among them was Commander Lyra Tovan, a former Dominion officer who had defected after witnessing the atrocities committed by her own people. Lyra's knowledge of Dominion tactics and technology was invaluable, and she quickly became Jace's second-in-command. Together, they planned their next move. The Dominion supply lines were heavily guarded, but Jace believed that a well-coordinated strike could cripple their operations. The target, a Dominion supply depot on the outskirts of the city. The raid. The raid on the supply depot was a daring operation. Jace and his team infiltrated the facility under the cover of darkness, using stolen Dominion uniforms to blend in. They planted explosives at key points, aiming to destroy the depot's power grid and disrupt the Dominion supply chain. But things didn't go as planned. As the team prepared to retreat, they were ambushed by a squad of Dominion elite soldiers. A fierce firefight broke out, and Jace found himself face to face with one of the Dominion's most feared warriors, Captain Dravencor. Part 3, The Shadows of Betrayal. The Resistance grows. The success of the convoy raid had galvanized the Eclipse resistance. Survivors from across the planet flocked to their cause, swelling their ranks and bringing much-needed skills and resources. Hidden bases sprang up in the ruins of Earth cities, connected by a network of underground tunnels and encrypted communication channels. For the first time since the Dominion's invasion, humanity felt a flicker of hope. But with growth came challenges. The Resistance was no longer a small, tight-knit group of fighters. It was a sprawling organization with diverse backgrounds, ideologies, and agendas. Tensions began to simmer beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. Jace Ryder, now the de facto leader of the Resistance, found himself struggling to keep the group united. "We're fighting for the same cause," he reminded them during a heated meeting. "If we turn on each other, the Dominion wins." A traitor in their midst. Unbeknownst to Jace, the Dominion had already begun to exploit these divisions. General Kael Vorik, the ruthless leader of the Dominion's forces on Earth, had planted a spy within the Resistance. The traitor's identity was unknown, but their actions were beginning to take a toll. Supply caches went missing. Patrols were ambushed by Dominion forces. And worst of all, the location of one of their hidden bases was leaked, resulting in a devastating attack that left dozens dead. Jace and Lyra Tovin knew they had a traitor in their midst, but rooting them out would not be easy. Trust was a fragile thing, and accusing the wrong person could shatter the Resistance from within. The meeting. Jace called a meeting of the Resistance's core leadership, Lyra, Garrick Voss, and a few others he trusted implicitly. "We have a leak," he said bluntly. "Someone's feeding information to the Dominion. We need to find out who it is, and fast." Garrick leaned forward, his weathered face grim. "It's someone close. They know our movements, our plans. If we don't stop them, we're all dead." Lyra nodded. "We need to set a trap. Feed false information to different groups and see which one the Dominion acts on." The trap. The plan was risky, but it was their best chance to uncover the traitor. Jace and Lyra devised a false mission, a supposed attack on a Dominion research facility. They spread different versions of the plan to different groups within the Resistance, each with slight variations. Only the traitor would know which version was real. As the days passed, the Resistance waited anxiously. Jace couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every whisper a potential betrayal. Then, the Dominion struck. The ambush. The attack came at night, as Jace and a small team were scouting a potential base location. Dominion soldiers descended on them with brutal efficiency, their plasma rifles cutting through the darkness. Jace and his team fought back, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. "Fall back!" Jace shouted, grabbing a wounded fighter and dragging them to cover. The team retreated into the ruins, using the crumbling buildings to their advantage. But the Dominion was relentless, their soldiers advancing with mechanical precision. Just as it seemed they were cornered, Lyra and Garrick arrived with reinforcements. A fierce firefight erupted, the night lit by the flashes of plasma fire and the explosions of grenades. The revelation. When the dust settled, the Dominion forces retreated, leaving behind their dead. Jace and his team were battered but alive. As they regrouped, Jace realized something: the Dominion had known exactly where to find them. The false mission had worked. The traitor had taken the bait. Back at the Resistance's main base, Jace and Lyra reviewed the data. Only one group had been given the location of the scouting mission, a team led by a man named Elias Kane. Elias had been with the Resistance since the beginning, a former soldier who had proven himself in battle. But as Jace and Lyra dug deeper, they found inconsistencies in his story. The confrontation. Jace called Elias into a private meeting, his heart heavy with suspicion. "We know there's a traitor," he said, watching Elias carefully. "And we think it's you." Elias's face remained calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. "You're wrong," he said. "I've been loyal to the Resistance from the start." Lyra stepped forward, holding up a data pad. "Then explain this. Your team was the only one with the location of the scouting mission. And yet, the Dominion knew exactly where to find us." Elias hesitated, his calm facade cracking. I didn't have a choice," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "They have my family. The Dominion took them after the invasion. They said they'd kill them if I didn't cooperate. A moral dilemma." Jace felt a surge of anger, but also pity. Elias had betrayed them, but he had done it to save his family. It was a choice Jace couldn't imagine having to make. "You should have come to us," Lyra said, her voice firm but not unkind. "We could have helped you." Elias shook his head. "You don't understand. The Dominion doesn't make empty threats. If I had refused, my family would be dead." Jace sighed, running a hand through his hair. "What's done is done. But we can't let this slide. You've put us all at risk." The decision. The Resistance leadership gathered to decide Elias's fate. Some argued for execution, others for imprisonment. But Jace had a different idea. "We need to send a message," he said. "Not just to the Dominion, but to our own people. We're fighting for something bigger than ourselves. If we start turning on each other, we've already lost." In the end, Elias was exiled. He was stripped of his rank and sent into the wilderness, with nothing but the clothes on his back. It was a harsh punishment, but it was also a chance for redemption. The Dominion's next move. As the Resistance dealt with the fallout of Elias's betrayal, General Kale Vorak was already planning his next move. The failed ambush had been a setback, but it had also revealed the Resistance's growing strength. "They are more organized than we anticipated," Kale said, studying the holographic map of Earth. "But they are still weak. We will crush them, once and for all." A new threat. Unbeknownst to both the Resistance and the Dominion, a new threat was emerging. Deep in the ruins of a forgotten city, an ancient artifact had been uncovered, a relic of a long-lost civilization. Its power was unknown, but its discovery would change the course of the war. As Jace and the Eclipse Resistance prepared for the battles to come, they had no idea that their fight was about to take a turn they could never have anticipated. Part 4, The Breaking Point. The Credori had never known fear, not real fear, not the kind that freezes the blood and scrambles thought. But as the battle between Ethan Rhodes and Marshal Vexus Orn entered its second hour, the atmosphere in the observation dome had shifted from amused confidence to stunned disbelief. Ethan moved with impossible precision, anticipating Vexus's attacks milliseconds before they happened. The human was battered, bleeding from a dozen small wounds, but amazingly still standing. More than standing, he was systematically dismantling the greatest warrior the Credori had ever produced. "Impossible," Colonel Razka whispered as Ethan slipped past another devastating blow and landed a precise strike to Vexus's knee joint, one of the few vulnerabilities in Credori physiology. Vexus staggered, his face contorted with rage and something new, uncertainty. "What are you?" he demanded, his voice ragged. Ethan circled warily, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. "I told you, Marshal. I'm just a human who studies his opponents. No human moves like you." Vexus snarled, launching another attack, a sweeping combination that should have been impossible to avoid in the confined space. Yet somehow Ethan was no longer there when the blows landed. He had shifted, just enough, just in time. "You're right," Ethan admitted, countering with a strike to Vexus's solar plexus that made the mighty Credori wheeze. "I'm not just any human. I'm the human who's going to end your conquest." The cameras continued to broadcast every moment. On Earth, billions watched in stunned silence. In the Credori Empire, warriors stared at their screens in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't possible. Admiral Yora Thorne watched the live feed with the Earth Defense Council, his mouth slightly agape. How is he doing this? Director Liang sat beside him, her expression unreadable. "When I found Rhodes 3 years ago, he was living in an abandoned research facility on Mars. Alone. He'd been there for decades." "Decades?" Counselor Rivera frowned. "That's not possible. He doesn't look a day over 35. He doesn't age normally," Liang said quietly. "And he's not entirely conventional in other ways either." Yora's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying, Director?" Liang watched as Ethan executed a perfect counter that sent Vexus sprawling. Before the Credori arrived, Earth was experimenting with enhancements. Biological, neurological, genetic. Most failed. Some succeeded too well. "He's an experiment?" Counselor Mbeki asked, horrified. "No," Liang shook her head. "He's the scientist who created the enhancements. And when his work was deemed too dangerous, he used them on himself rather than let them be destroyed." Silence fell over the council chamber as they processed this information. "How old is he?" Yora finally asked. Liang met his gaze steadily. "He was born in 2103. Gasps erupted around the table. "That would make Ethan Rhodes nearly 200 years old. Why didn't you tell us?" Rivera demanded. "Would you have believed me?" Liang countered. "Would you have trusted humanity's future to a man who's been hiding on Mars for a century?" Their attention was pulled back to the screen as Vexus let out a bellow of fury that shook the lunar base. Vexus had never bled in combat. Never. The sensation was unfamiliar, alarming, blue-black fluid seeping from cuts that should have been impossible for a human to inflict. His armor, designed to withstand plasma weapons, now hung in tatters. "You can't win," he growled, trying to sound confident. "Your body is breaking. I can hear your bones cracking, your muscles tearing." Ethan nodded, his breathing labored. "You're right. This human form has limitations. But so does yours, Marshal. The difference," Vexus snarled, "is that I have reserves you can't imagine." "So do I," Ethan replied softly. "The difference is that I understand yours, but you know nothing of mine." Something in Ethan's tone sent a chill through the watching Credori officers. Their species had conquered half the galaxy based on one simple truth: they were superior to all others. Stronger, faster, more durable. Their bodies were living weapons, honed through generations of genetic engineering. Yet this human, this single, fragile human, was winning. Vexus charged again, abandoning technique for raw power. If he could just land one solid blow, this nightmare would end. The human would break. Order would be restored. Ethan waited until the last possible moment, then moved, not away, but toward the attack. It was suicide. It was madness. It was brilliant. He slid inside Vexus's guard, accepting a glancing blow to his shoulder that would leave it useless, but positioning himself perfectly for a two-fingered strike to a nerve cluster beneath the Credori's jaw. Vexus froze, his entire left side suddenly numb. "Surprising, isn't it?" Ethan said conversationally, though his face was pale from pain. "Your nervous system is remarkably similar to an Earth species called the mantis shrimp. Fascinating creatures. Complex, but ultimately predictable once you understand their structure. Vexus stared at him in horror. You studied our biology? How? We've never allowed. You've conquered 63 Earth colonies, Ethan interrupted. Did you think no one was collecting data each time you fell? Analyzing your movements, your responses to different environments, weapons, tactics? No human could process that much information, Vexus said, shaking his head to clear the numbness. Ethan smiled sadly. I'm not just any human, Marshal. I've had a very, very long time to study you. Before Vexus could respond, Ethan moved again, a flurry of precise strikes targeting nerve clusters, pressure points, and the subtle weaknesses in Credori anatomy that no outsider should have known existed. Vexus fought back desperately, landing several powerful blows that sent Ethan staggering. But for every hit Vexus landed, Ethan struck 3 times, each with surgical precision. The watching officers began to shift uncomfortably. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a demonstration. A lesson. Remarkable, Colonel Razka murmured despite himself. He's fighting like he designed our bodies himself. In a way, that was exactly what Ethan was doing. With each exchange, he was reverse-engineering the Credori physiology, finding the subtle flaws in their supposedly perfect design. Vexus realized it too late. Stop, he roared, retreating to catch his breath. This is unnatural. Ethan paused, swaying slightly. His right arm hung limp, his face was bruised, and blood soaked the front of his jumpsuit. Coming from a species engineered for war, that's rather hypocritical. We were made to rule, Vexus declared, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. It is our purpose, our destiny. Ethan shook his head. No one is made to rule, Marshal. Leadership must be earned through wisdom, not enforced through fear. Pretty words from a dying man, Vexus snarled, gathering himself for one final assault. I've been dying for a very long time, Ethan replied with a strange smile. I've made peace with it. Have you? And then, as Vexus lunged forward, Ethan did something that would be replayed across the galaxy for centuries to come. Instead of dodging or blocking, he stepped directly into Vexus's path and placed his palm against the Credori's chest. The impact should have crushed Ethan's spine. Instead, Vexus stopped as if he'd hit a wall. What? He began, but the word died in his throat as Ethan's eyes changed, the green irises expanding until they consumed the whites. I studied your kind for decades, Ethan said, his voice suddenly resonating with a strange harmonic quality. But I've studied myself for centuries. Energy crackled between them, not electrical, but something more fundamental. The Credori officers watching stepped back involuntarily. This was beyond their experience, beyond their understanding. Your conquest ends here, Ethan said, and there was genuine regret in his voice. I'm sorry it came to this. A pulse of energy emanated from Ethan's palm, spreading through Vexus's body like a wave. The mighty Credori warrior convulsed once, his eyes wide with shock and, finally, fear. Then he collapsed to the ground, unconscious but alive. Silence fell over the observation dome. The Credori officers stared at their fallen leader, then at the battered human who somehow remained standing. Ethan swayed, his strange eyes fading back to normal. The terms of combat were clear, he said, his voice now weak but steady. Earth remains free. The Credori will withdraw immediately from Earth space. Colonel Razka stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion and awe. What are you? Ethan considered the question, then smiled faintly. A reminder, he said, that there's always something you don't understand yet. Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed beside his fallen opponent. The emergency medical team from Earth arrived within minutes, rushing Ethan to the waiting shuttle. Director Leung supervised personally, her face grim as she surveyed his injuries. Will he survive? Admiral Thorne asked, watching from the shuttle's entrance. He always does, Liang replied cryptically. Outside, the Credori officers had removed their unconscious marshal. The terms of combat were sacred to their kind, a defeat in single combat was binding. Already, the massive warships in Earth orbit were beginning to move away, their formations breaking as they prepared to return to Credori.